Welcome back to Talking Treasures at Garside and Webb Auctioneers. Today we have a special guest expert, Alan Donnelly, who has been in the antique business for over 30 years. Alan?
Goodness me, it sounds a long time, almost antique myself. Paul, it's Paul, is it?
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, it's Alan Donnelly. Well, where do all these come from? Yeah.
Well, just knickknacks from op shops and bits and pieces
Right.
I've just picked up. Just
Not
things,
family pieces or anything like
no,
that?
just things I bought for next to nothing that I like. And
Well, I think you said the most important thing, if you like it.
yeah,
Being in the game a long time, if you like it, you're halfway there. Most of these actually, two of these are commemorative pieces, this particular one, and you've got another one there with the Mayfair we'll come to in a moment, but this is just a reasonably modern copy of a commemorative mug, and put out really for people that do collect this type of thing, such as memorabilia, ships, what have you, anything to do with that. Not worth a great deal, but that's the sort of thing. It's around about $20, $25, maybe $30. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. In the same line, that particular one there, this one's commemorating the Mayflower, and lovely tankard. I notice a mark on here, and this would have been put on by the actual maker. The fact that the maker has put his registration mark on there means he rated it as well, and that's something that's worth the $40 to $50.
Right.
And that's the sort of thing that obviously you've got an interest in, that it'll look good and have the two pieces together.
very much so.
This one, this particular one is called the Blue Jasperware Wedgwood, put out by that famous company that we all know about, Wedgwood, and they, of course, have done many things over the years, and this particular one, made in England, it came in after 1905, so yeah, so it's quite an early one. It could be around the 30s or 40s. Very collectible. We get a lot through our auctions, and this particular one's a lovely little piece, actually, particularly to someone that's interested in golfing, and that one's around about $60 or $70.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, particularly for anyone with golf.
You're watching Talking Treasures, a CTV Perth production. I'm sitting here with John Stringer, who is currently the curator of Kerry Stokes' collection, is that right?
That's correct.
John, how do you see art in Perth at the moment?
Well, I think art in Perth, I think art in Australia generally is in pretty good shape, but I think that Perth is part of that. What differentiates Perth from most of the rest of Australia, or at least the places that are known for their art, is that we're isolated and on our own, and our artists don't so often get to be seen interstate. For instance, it's only now after his death that Howard Taylor has been recognised as a kind of national figure. We all believed this while Howard was living, and he was a pretty successful artist here as well. But so there are lots of opportunities if people are interested in contemporary art. There are quite a few galleries in Perth, and you can be the first owner of an artwork. You don't have to buy it from an auction room or from the secondary market. You can actually get out there and be the first one who ever owned it. It's an interesting thing that back in the 70s, when the Aboriginals first started painting on boards and using colours instead of ochres and so on, the people who bought those small paintings, which were not highly valued in those days, those are the people who have really made money out of art, because there are things that were bought for $100 and have sold for $350,000. Now, there are not such a lot of those panels around, but the thing is, if you are collecting art, you should do it because you like it, because it interests you. You should not really, matters of money, finance should not be foremost in your mind. I mean, you shouldn't do stupid things, spend more money than you can afford and so on. But you have to figure out if the artwork is worth it for you. Do you think you're going to get $100 or $200 or $1,000 worth of enjoyment out of this piece and be satisfied with that, because that's why it was made? if it's really well made and there is an eventual consensus that it's by a master and it's a terrific work, it's going to be worth a lot more. But artworks need to be loved, they need to be owned, and they need to be looked at. That's what they were done for.
Because the chances are, if you appreciate it, other people will
Well,
appreciate
exactly.
it.
And the artist's career grows because the artist sells something and they can get on with something else, and they might get some feedback from you which might influence what they're doing. But also you as a collector grow as you surround yourself by things. You will find out certain things about yourself. Maybe that you've got a taste for colour, or maybe for three-dimensional things, or maybe you like glass, maybe you precipitate into something media-specific like ceramics. There are all sorts of ways to go. But we do have plenty of producers in Perth, and we have, the state is very, very rich in artists because our Aboriginal artists, in fact, are pretty well known elsewhere in Australia, although they live in such remote places like Warman and so on.
Do you think perhaps the isolation we have here breeds perhaps more intense artists? Like,
I don't think
as
it's a bad thing.
exposed?
I don't think it's a bad thing because people have got to get on with their act, and they've got to figure things out and do it. And they can't coast along or copy other people's work or whatever. I think it is quite a constructive situation. It's difficult for the artists because they don't live in an environment where they get a lot of feedback about their work. And I think that the support structure has grown a lot. I'd say that there are probably a lot more individuals collecting now than there would have been, say, 10 years ago. I think that the public is becoming more sophisticated, although there is still a long way to go. It's a job that never finishes.
Perhaps
but
there's just more interest being shown now.
well, yes, I hope, well, there are more of us, there are more people, but I think the attitudes have changed, and as I say, they need to change a bit more. But if we want a vibrant art scene, it's not going to happen without our support. Artists need to live. It's as simple as that.
That's great. Thank you very much, John.
On Talking Treasures, I'm joined by Jamie, who's bought me in a book.
Great. I've recently bought a house in Scarborough. I found this in down the back shed. So
Good grief.
If you could tell me a little bit about Thomas the Tank and a little bit of history on it.
Got any young kids in your family at the moment?
Yeah, I've got two.
So Thomas the Tank Engine, you realise, is on TV
Yes, I do.
with one of the Beatles doing one of the voices.
That's right, Ringo Starr.
Yeah, good old Ringo Starr, and what a great voice it is too. This is a very early edition of the book. This is the format they came out in. This is not the first book that the good Reverend wrote. This is the second book. That's why it's Thomas the Tank Engine again. And I think if we take a look in here, we've got the publication details on the back of the title page. This is not a first edition of the second book in the series, but is a reprint of that first edition. It's called The Second Impression here, which means, as you can see, September 49 the book comes out, April 1950 this particular copy of the book's made with the second printing. The books were very well received when they came out in the late 40s in the UK, and they'd already been successful at the time the second book came out, and that they'd made a lot of sales. Part of it, I think, is the colour press work that's in here.
Yeah.
Kids are always interested in characters and that move, that talk, and making trains, giving them a personality, was, I think, the genius of the particular writer, the Reverend, who was behind the series of Thomas the Tank Engine stories. The books themselves are well produced. They're good boards, they're sewn bindings, so the books can take a fair bit of wear.
Punishment, yeah.
They can, and this is what tends to happen to bindings over a period of time. But this isn't irretrievable. It could be rebound quite easily to tighten the book up and give it back a look of new. This book is used, and you expect that of nursery books, books that are used for kids that are learning to read. The pages are worn. There is some staining in the book itself. So we're not talking about a pristine copy of the book here, but Thomas the Tank Engine books in pristine copy, particularly first of any of the titles, are now worth very good money thanks to the television series. And by very good money, I mean hundreds of dollars, not tens of dollars. A copy like this might be worth $25 max, given the wear and tear that the book has actually had, and given the frequency of firsts available in Australia, and I'm telling you, they're pretty rare. There weren't a lot that came out to nurseries and to children's booksellers in Australia, but there were some, so they do turn up from time to time. The book would have originally had a dust jack as well, and that increases the value for a collector. So in mint condition, with a dust jacket, a couple of $100 for the item. In this condition, obviously it's depreciated somewhat, but nonetheless, still a very serviceable book for reading, and certainly one that you could pass within the family with great surety.
Thanks very much, mate.
You're welcome.
And that concludes Talking Treasures for this week, a CTV Perth production. My name's Miley Tunnicliffe, and we've been coming to you from Garside and Webb Auctioneers in Perth. Our experts have been Matt Donnelly, who talked about collectibles, Grant Stone on toys and books, Jelly Hayes on jewellery and silverware, and John Stringer on fine arts. Join us next week because we're going to have a whole pile of new treasures for our experts to have a look at.